Welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever looked at a local policy decision in your town and just thought, wait a second, the math on this really doesn't add up? Well, that is exactly what happened to Alaska resident Michael Varman. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating formal advocacy letter and fact brief that he put together. And honestly, what he's done here is pretty remarkable. He actually went in and investigated the surprising fiscal machinery behind local school closures in his community. And he didn't stop there. He created a whole blueprint for action. So let's trace the money together and see how one citizen is demanding accountability just by doing the math.
Varman frames this whole localized community crisis in Meadow Lakes, Alaska, not as some simple administrative budget adjustment, but as a literal rupture of the state's promises. He writes, "The news that approximately 650 students across 3 schools will be displaced is not simply a line item in a spreadsheet. He truly sees the closure of these community anchor schools as a devastating message to local families."
And we're talking about stakes that are incredibly immediate. 650 students are facing displacement right now because of a massive $23 million budget shortfall in the Matsuburo School District. I mean, really think about that impact for a second. We're talking about kids potentially being bused dozens of miles away from their own neighborhoods.
Part 1. A community in crisis. Matsu school closures. Let's take a look at the actual schools involved here. So, district administrators propose closing 3 neighborhood schools, Meadow Lakes Elementary, Larson Elementary, and Glacier View School. But here's where the math reveals a pretty glaring issue. Closing these 3 schools, it only saves about $4.5 million. That's actually less than 20% of the total $23 million shortfall. This massive unexplained gap led Varman to ask a very logical question. Where on earth has all the state funding gone?
Section 2. The marijuana tax disconnect, expectation versus reality.
Let's rewind a bit to 2014, when Alaska voters legalized recreational marijuana. There was this widespread, totally reasonable expectation that this new industry's tax revenue would flow directly back into public services, right? Especially public schools. But did it? Consider Varman's core question about Alaska Statute 43.61.010, which levies a $50 per ounce tax on marijuana. Where does that money actually go today?
Well, the statutory distribution of that tax is incredibly revealing. 50% goes straight to the Recidivism Reduction Fund, 25% goes to the General Fund, another 25% goes to the Marijuana Education and Treatment Fund. But notice that last piece of the pie, 0%. Literally not a single penny of this tax is statutorily dedicated to public K-12 school operations or the base student allocation.
Now you're probably thinking, wait a minute, the Met Fund literally says the word education right there in the title. Well, Varman caught this too. While it sounds totally education adjacent, it actually goes straight to the Department of Health for drug treatment and prevention programs. It absolutely does not fund a single teacher or heat a single classroom.
Part 3. The small school penalty, funding formula flaws.
Varman also identified a much deeper structural issue here, one that specifically punishes rural schools. It all comes down to something called ADM, or average daily membership. Basically, this is the official count of enrolled students that dictates exactly how much state funding a district gets through the base student allocation formula. And under this formula, it's a direct dollar-for-dollar link. So if even a single family moves away or decides to switch to homeschooling, state funding drops immediately, which creates some immense financial volatility for these communities.
Look at how this plays out. From 2019 to today, Meadow Lakes dropped by just about 30 students. Larson dropped from 430 to 304. Glacier View, which is a rural school, went from 53 down to just 19 students. Now, numerically, sure, those are pretty small declines, but they carry devastating financial consequences. Why? Because the school's fixed operational costs, heating the massive building, keeping the lights on, they don't shrink just because a few students leave. Small schools just don't have the economies of scale to absorb those sudden funding drops.
But Varman points out there actually is a legislative fix on the table right now, House Bill 261. And this isn't some fringe idea. It passed the Alaska House by a very bipartisan 31-9 vote on May 12, 2026. That bipartisan support really proves this isn't a political issue, it's a structural one. Basically, instead of using a single-year snapshot that creates these terrifying funding cliffs, HB 261 allows districts to calculate student counts using a 3-year rolling average. It totally smooths out the enrollment volatility.
And the real-world impact of that fix, it's massive. Varman's fact brief estimates that HB 261 would deliver $143 million in stabilization to school districts statewide. But as Varman notes with a lot of urgency, the legislative session is nearing its end, and this bill is just sitting in the Senate.
Schools are literally closing right now, which makes Senate passage absolutely critical today, not next year.
Section 4. The Colorado Model Education Blueprint.
Varman points out that this entire policy failure, the lack of dedicated tax revenue for schools, is ultimately a choice, and he looks outside Alaska to prove it, comparing their system directly to Colorado's. Both states legalized recreational marijuana pretty early on, but look at the stark difference here. Alaska statutorily dedicates $0 of its marijuana excise tax to K-12 school operations. Colorado, on the other hand, made an explicit binding commitment right from the start. They constitutionally dedicated tax revenue to school construction through their BEST program and channeled additional funds directly into public school support. Colorado tied legalization directly to tangible benefits for the next generation. Alaska, well, they simply did not.
Finally, Section 5, a blueprint for action, Mat-Su solutions.
What I love about Varman's approach is that he doesn't just point out the problems, he provides a concrete blueprint to fix them. He lays out 4 highly specific actionable requests to stop the displacement of those 650 students. 1. Amend the state statute to legally redirect at least 25% of the marijuana tax straight to the base student allocation. 2. The state Senate needs to pass House Bill 261 immediately to stabilize those budgets with the 3-year rolling average. 3. Provide a completely transparent public accounting of exactly what Mat-Su fund dollars the district received and how they were spent. And 4. Declare an immediate moratorium on all Mat-Su school closures until these legislative remedies can actually be exhausted.
Which brings us to the ultimate question Varman leaves us with. It's truly a race against time right now. The legislative clock is ticking down on the current session, and irreversible decisions are being made about these community anchor schools. So will Alaska restructure its promises, or will those 650 kids be locked out of their neighborhood schools for good? Michael Varman's blueprint is proof that when everyday citizens actually follow the money, they can demand real accountability. Keep questioning the numbers behind the policies in your own community, and thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.